If you enjoy heartwarming and emotional real-life stories, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our touching narratives that will move your soul. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets near Buckingham Palace. Sergeant Thomas Mitchell stood at his post, his red uniform perfectly pressed, his bearskin hat positioned precisely as protocol demanded. He had served in the Queen's Guard for 12 years, and in all that time he had seen countless tourists, excited children, and curious onlookers. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. A small girl, no more than 7 years old, approached him with hesitant steps. Her blonde hair was tangled, her pink dress torn at the hem, and her shoes were scuffed and dirty. What struck Thomas most were her eyes. They held a terror that no child should ever experience. While dozens of tourists snapped photos and giggled at the stoic guards, this little girl looked different. She wasn't here for a picture or a laugh. She was here because she was desperate. Thomas maintained his rigid posture as regulations required. The royal guards were not permitted to speak, move, or break their stance, except under specific circumstances. Tourism depended on this tradition, and breaking protocol was grounds for serious disciplinary action. Yet something about this child made every instinct in his body scream that something was terribly wrong. The girl reached up with a trembling hand and tugged gently at his uniform. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the brief moment of relative quiet between tourist groups, Thomas heard her words clearly. She said there was a white van parked 2 streets away, near the service entrance. She said there were other children inside. She said they were crying, and that a man had told them they would never see their families again. Thomas felt his blood run cold. His training kicked in immediately. While he could not abandon his post or speak to tourists under normal circumstances, the safety of children superseded all protocol. He caught the eye of his fellow guard, Corporal James Bradley, stationed 15 feet away. Using the subtle communication system developed between guards over years of service, Thomas signaled an emergency. James understood instantly, within seconds. James had discreetly radioed the situation to the command center while maintaining his outward composure. Thomas looked down at the little girl, breaking protocol for just a moment to give her the smallest nod. It was a silent promise that help was coming. The girl's eyes filled with tears of relief, and she stepped back into the crowd. Police units were dispatched immediately, along with plainclothes security officers who could investigate without causing public panic. Thomas remained at his post, but his mind raced. What if the girl was mistaken? What if this was some misunderstanding? But deep in his heart, he knew she was telling the truth. That look of pure terror in her eyes was not something a child could fake, as minutes ticked by like hours. Thomas spotted the little girl again. She was standing near a lamppost, watching him anxiously. She seemed to be waiting, hoping he had understood her plea. Thomas wanted nothing more than to run to that van himself, to tear open its doors and rescue whoever might be inside. But he had to trust the system, trust his fellow officers, and trust that his decision to break protocol had been the right one. The tourists continued their cheerful chatter, completely unaware of the dark drama unfolding just streets away. Cameras clicked, children laughed, and families posed for photos. It was the contrast that struck Thomas most deeply. Here stood the symbol of British tradition and safety, while somewhere nearby, children were potentially living through a nightmare. The weight of his uniform suddenly felt heavier than ever before, carrying with it the responsibility to protect not just the crown, but every innocent soul in his city. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen received the emergency call while reviewing case files at Scotland Yard. The message was brief but chilling. A child had reported multiple children trapped in a van near Buckingham Palace. The Royal Guard had flagged it as a priority emergency. Sarah grabbed her jacket and was out the door within 30 seconds. Her partner, Detective Mark Thompson, right behind her. They arrived at the location within 8 minutes, accompanied by 2 patrol cars and a tactical response unit. The white van sat innocuously on a quiet side street, looking like any other delivery vehicle. Its windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. There were no company logos, no license plates, Nothing that would help identify its owner or purpose. To any passerby, it would appear completely normal. But Sarah had learned long ago that evil often wore the mask of ordinary. The street had been quietly cordoned off at both ends, preventing the van from leaving while maintaining a low profile to avoid spooking whoever might be inside. Sarah approached carefully, her hand resting on her radio. Mark moved to the opposite side of the vehicle, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The tactical team held their positions, ready to move in at a moment's notice. Sarah knocked firmly on the van's rear door. The sound echoed in the quiet street. No response. She knocked again, louder this time, identifying herself as police. Still nothing. She tried the door handle. Locked. Mark checked the driver's side door. Also locked. The van appeared completely sealed, a metal box holding secrets that Sarah was determined to uncover. Back at Buckingham Palace, Thomas remained at his post, though his shift was nearly over. He had not received any updates about the situation, which was standard procedure. Guards were not privy to ongoing investigations, but he could not stop thinking about that little girl. Where was she now? Had she been telling the truth? Were children really in danger, or had this been a false alarm that would result in paperwork and questions about his decision to break protocol? Sarah made the decision to force entry. The potential risk to children outweighed concerns about property damage or legal complications. The tactical team moved in with specialized tools, and within moments, they had breached the van's rear doors. What they found inside made even these seasoned officers step back in shock. The van's interior had been modified. The seats had been removed, and in their place were makeshift wooden benches bolted to the floor. Scattered throughout were children's belongings. Small backpacks, torn stuffed animals, a pink shoe, coloring books, and half-eaten snacks. The van reeked of fear and desperation, but there were no children inside. The van was empty. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Had the children been moved? Had the little girl been mistaken about the location? Or worse, had whoever was responsible seen the police presence and already fled with his victims? She ordered her team to process the van immediately as a crime scene. Every surface would be dusted for prints, every fiber collected for analysis. Every item photographed and cataloged. Mark discovered something crucial under one of the wooden benches. It was a small notebook, cheaply made with a cartoon character on the cover. Inside were names. 12 names, all in different handwriting. Some were written in crayon, others in pencil. Next to each name was a city: London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool. These were not random names scribbled by a child playing. These were records, documentation, evidence of something far more sinister than Sarah had initially imagined. One name on the list made Sarah's heart stop. Emma Hartley, age 7, London. 3 weeks ago, Emma Hartley had been reported missing from a playground in South London. Her case had been all over the news. Her parents had pleaded on television for her safe return. Police had searched extensively, but found no leads. And now here was her name, written in a child's uncertain handwriting. In a van that had been used to transport multiple children, Sarah immediately called for additional units and contacted the National Crime Agency. This was no longer a simple investigation. This was part of something bigger, something organized. The van, the modifications, the list of names from different cities. This pointed to a trafficking ring, and if the little girl who had alerted the Royal Guard was correct, then these children were still out there somewhere, and time was running out. The team worked with urgent precision, knowing that every minute counted. The van would provide clues, but they needed to find the children before it was too late. Thomas finally completed his shift at Buckingham Palace, but instead of heading home, he made his way to the local police station. He needed to know what had happened with the little girl's report. When he arrived, the station was buzzing with activity. Officers hurried between rooms, phones rang constantly, and the atmosphere crackled with urgent energy. Something big was happening. A young officer recognized Thomas's uniform and quickly brought him to Detective Inspector Sarah Chen's temporary command center. Sarah looked up from a table covered in photographs and documents. Her eyes were tired but fierce with determination. When she saw Thomas, She stood and shook his hand firmly. She told him that because of his quick thinking and the brave little girl, they had uncovered evidence of a major child trafficking operation. Thomas felt relief and horror wash over him simultaneously. Relief that he had made the right decision to break protocol. Horror at what the evidence suggested. Sarah showed him the notebook with the names. She explained that forensic teams were analyzing the van and had already found DNA evidence from at least 8 different children. The case had been escalated to the highest priority level, but there was a problem. They still had not found the little girl who had first reported the van. She had disappeared into the crowd after speaking to Thomas. And despite reviewing all available security camera footage from the area, they could not locate her. Sarah asked Thomas to describe everything he remembered about her. Her appearance, her voice, her exact words. Anything that might help identify her. Thomas closed his eyes and recalled every detail. The torn pink dress, the scuffed shoes, the tangled blonde hair. But most importantly, he remembered her eyes. They held a knowledge that no 7-year-old should possess. The knowledge of what it meant to be trapped, to be afraid, to be in the hands of someone evil. Thomas suddenly realized something that made his stomach turn. The little girl had not just seen the van. She had been inside it. She was one of the victims. Sarah immediately understood the implication. This changed everything. The girl had escaped, which meant she might still be nearby, hiding, afraid to trust anyone except a figure of authority, like a royal guard. It also meant that whoever was responsible might be searching for her, desperate to silence the only witness who could identify them. Citywide alert was issued with the description Thomas provided. Every officer on duty began searching parks, shelters, alleys, and any place a frightened child might hide. Social workers were brought in to help, understanding that a traumatized child would need special care when found. Thomas insisted on joining the search, and Sarah agreed, thinking the girl might respond to the familiar face of the guard she had trusted. As night fell over London, the search intensified. Thomas walked through the streets surrounding Buckingham Palace, looking into every shadow, checking every doorway. He spoke softly as he walked, hoping she might hear him and recognize his voice. He promised her she was safe now, that the bad people could not hurt her anymore, that he would protect her just as he protected the Queen. In a narrow alley behind a tourist shop, Thomas finally found her. She was huddled behind a dumpster, clutching a discarded cardboard box like a shield. When she saw Thomas, still in his distinctive red uniform, her face crumpled and tears streamed down her cheeks. He knelt slowly, making himself less intimidating, and spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage. He told her his name was Thomas, that the police were looking for her not to be angry, but to help her, and that she was the bravest person he had ever met. The little girl whispered her name, Lily. She was 8 years old, not 7, as Thomas had estimated. She told him she had been taken from a park 3 days ago while her mother was talking to a friend. A man had offered her candy and then grabbed her, covering her mouth so she could not scream. She was thrown into the van where 5 other children were already trapped. They had been driven around for hours, stopping occasionally to pick up more children. Lily explained that the van had stopped near Buckingham Palace because the man driving needed to meet someone. He had stepped out for just a few minutes, leaving the van unlocked, a mistake born from arrogance or routine. Lily had seen her chance. She quietly opened the door and ran, leaving the other children behind because she knew if she tried to help them all escape, they would make noise and get caught. She had run straight to the guard because her father had always told her that if she was ever in trouble, find a police officer or a guard, someone in uniform who was there to protect people. Thomas carefully lifted Lily and carried her out of the alley. Sarah was waiting with a female officer and a social worker who specialized in trauma. Lily was wrapped in a warm blanket and given water and food. Medical personnel checked her for injuries. Physically, she was mostly unharmed, though dehydrated and exhausted. Emotionally, the scars would take much longer to heal. Lily sat in a comfortable room at the police station designed specifically for interviewing children. Soft chairs, toys, and calming colors made the space feel less intimidating. Sarah Chen sat across from her with a child psychologist present to ensure Lily felt safe. Thomas was allowed to stay as well, sitting quietly in the corner. Lily had insisted he remain, as he was the only adult she fully trusted at that moment. With gentle questions and infinite patience, Sarah began to piece together Lily's story. The man who had taken her was tall, with dark hair and a scar on his left hand. He had driven the van to different locations across London, picking up children who were alone or vulnerable. At one stop, he had met with a woman who seemed to give him instructions. Lily had heard them talking about taking the children to a warehouse by the river. Before moving them out of the country, this information was critical. Sarah immediately dispatched teams to search warehouses along the Thames. There were hundreds of potential locations, but they had to start somewhere. The National Crime Agency coordinated with local police, and within an hour, nearly 200 officers were involved in the search operation. Helicopter units with thermal imaging cameras were deployed to scan buildings for signs of life. Lily continued her account, describing the other children in the van. She remembered their faces, their names, their fear. There was Jack, a 6-year-old boy with red hair who cried for his mother constantly. There was Aisha, a 9-year-old girl, who tried to comfort the younger children, even though she was terrified herself. There was Sophie, who was only 5 and did not fully understand what was happening. Each name Lily provided matched missing children reports from across London and surrounding areas. The forensic team working on the van made a breakthrough. They recovered partial fingerprints that matched a man named Michael Brennan, who had previous convictions for assault and theft, but nothing related to children. His last known address was a flat in East London. Officers were sent to the location immediately, but the flat was empty. Neighbors reported seeing Brennan leaving in a hurry earlier that day with several large bags. He knew the police were closing in. Sarah made a calculated decision. She released Brennan's photo to the media with a warning that he was dangerous and potentially armed. She knew this might spook him further, but she also knew that public awareness could be their greatest asset. Within minutes, Brennan's face was on every news channel and social media platform. Someone, somewhere would recognize him. The call came in less than an hour later. A dock worker at a commercial shipping area near Tilbury reported seeing a man matching Brennan's description, loading items into a large shipping container. The man had been with several children who appeared drowsy and compliant, likely drugged. The dock worker had thought it odd, but had not realized the children were in danger until seeing the news alert. Armed response units raced to the location. The area was secured within minutes, and officers began a systematic search of the massive shipping yard. Hundreds of containers were stacked in rows, creating a maze of metal. Finding the right container before it was loaded onto a ship was like finding a needle in a haystack. But they had no choice but to try. Thomas, despite no longer being on official duty, drove to Tilbury with Sarah's permission. He could not sit idle knowing those children were still in danger. When he arrived, the scene was controlled chaos. Officers with search dogs moved between containers, while others checked manifests and shipping records. The shipping company cooperated fully, providing access to their systems and personnel. A detective studying the shipping logs noticed something suspicious. One container scheduled for immediate departure to Rotterdam had been booked and paid for in cash just hours ago. The paperwork listed the contents as industrial equipment, but the container's weight did not match what such equipment should weigh. It was too light. Sarah ordered the container located immediately. They found it on the far end of the yard, already loaded onto a flatbed truck minutes away from being transported to a waiting ship. Officers surrounded the truck, and the driver was detained for questioning. He claimed he was just doing his job and knew nothing about the contents. They believed him. He was a pawn in a larger operation. The container doors were sealed with a heavy lock. Bolt cutters made quick work of it, and as the doors swung open, officers were hit with the smell of fear and unwashed bodies. Inside, huddled together on the metal floor, were 11 children ranging in age from 5 to 12. They were dirty, scared, and traumatized, but they were alive. Several officers, hardened by years of seeing terrible things, felt tears in their eyes. Michael Brennan was not inside the container. He had loaded the children and disappeared, likely assuming the shipment would proceed without issue. and he would collect his payment from whoever was waiting on the other end. But the net was closing around him. His face was everywhere, and he had nowhere to hide. Every airport, train station, and port was on alert. Every officer in the country was looking for him. The children were carefully removed from the container and immediately given medical attention. Paramedics checked vital signs, provided water and blankets, and spoke in soothing tones. Social workers began the delicate process of identifying each child and contacting their families. These reunions would be emotional and complex, as the children had been through experiences that would require extensive therapy and support. The reunions began that same night at a secure facility where families were brought under police escort. Parents who had spent days, weeks, or in some cases months fearing the worst were about to see their children again. The emotional scenes that unfolded were both heartbreaking and beautiful. Mothers collapsed in relief, fathers wept openly, and siblings embraced with a fierce intensity that spoke of the nightmares they had endured while their loved ones were missing. Emma, Hartley's parents, arrived, still in shock. Unable to believe their daughter had actually been found, when Emma saw them, she ran with all the strength her small body could muster and crashed into their arms. The three of them sank to the floor together, holding each other and sobbing. Emma's mother kept repeating that she was sorry, so sorry for looking away for just a moment at the playground. Emma kept saying it was not her fault that the bad man had tricked her. The healing would be long and difficult, but in that moment, they were simply grateful to be together again. Lily's reunion was different. Her mother had been destroyed by guilt and fear in the 3 days since Lily's disappearance. She had barely eaten or slept, spending every moment searching, pleading, and praying. When she saw Lily, healthy and safe, she let out a sound that was part cry and part gasp of disbelief. Lily ran to her mother, and they held each other as though they would never let go again. Lily's mother thanked Thomas over and over, calling him a hero. Thomas gently redirected the praise to Lily, explaining that her daughter's bravery had saved not just herself, but 11 other children. The investigation continued with intensified focus. The container shipment records led police to a criminal organization that operated across multiple countries. This was not a single predator acting alone, but rather a sophisticated network that kidnapped children for various purposes, including illegal adoption, forced labor, and worse. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across Europe, triggering coordinated investigations in 6 countries. Michael Brennan was captured 48 hours after the children were rescued. He had attempted to board a ferry to France using a fake passport, but alert border officials recognized him despite his attempt to disguise his appearance. He was arrested without incident and immediately began trying to negotiate a deal in exchange for information about the larger organization. Prosecutors made it clear there would be no deals. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and they intended to pursue the maximum sentence. During interrogation, Brennan revealed chilling details about the operation. He was a mid-level operative paid to collect children and transport them to various locations. He claimed not to know what happened to them after he made the deliveries, though investigators doubted this. He named several associates, providing information that led to arrests in London, Birmingham, and Manchester. Each arrest led to more information. Unraveling the network strand by strand, the woman Lily had seen giving instructions to Brennan was identified as Patricia Wells, who ran what appeared to be a legitimate foster care agency, but was actually a front for the trafficking operation. She had access to vulnerable children through the system and knew which ones would not be immediately missed or vigorously searched for. Her arrest was particularly satisfying for Sarah and her team. As Wells had been operating under their noses for years, hiding behind a veneer of respectability and charitable work, Thomas returned to his duties at Buckingham Palace. But his life had changed in ways he had not anticipated. The story of the royal guard who broke protocol to save children had captured public imagination. News outlets wanted interviews, which he politely declined. He did not want fame or recognition. He had simply done what any decent person would do when faced with a child in need. However, his actions did spark an important conversation within the royal guard about protocols and common sense. New guidelines were established that gave guards explicit permission to break stance if they witnessed or were informed of immediate danger to any person, especially children. Thomas's superiors privately commended him, though officially they could not be seen encouraging protocol violations. The balance between tradition and humanity had shifted slightly. That was no small thing. The children began the long process of healing. Specialized therapists worked with each one, understanding that trauma affects every child differently. Some had nightmares. Others became withdrawn, and a few seemed to bounce back with remarkable resilience. Support groups were established for the families who also needed help processing what their children had endured. The community rallied around them, offering everything from free counseling to financial assistance to simple gestures of kindness. Lily formed a special bond with Thomas. With her mother's permission, he visited them occasionally, bringing small gifts and checking on Lily's progress. She had drawn him a picture of a royal guard standing tall and strong, with the words "My Hero" written in crayon across the top. Thomas kept that picture in his locker at work, a reminder of why the uniform he wore mattered beyond ceremony and tradition. It represented protection, duty, and the willingness to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. 6 months after the rescue, a special ceremony was held at Scotland Yard. To honor everyone involved in the operation that had saved 12 children and exposed an international trafficking network, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen received a commendation for her leadership and investigative work. The dock worker who had called in the tip about Brennan was recognized for his vigilance. The forensic team members who had processed evidence with such speed and accuracy were acknowledged for their crucial contributions. But the ceremony's most emotional moment came when Thomas Mitchell was called forward. He stood uncomfortable in the spotlight, still in his Royal Guard uniform. As the Commissioner of Police described how his split-second decision to trust a frightened child had set everything in motion, Thomas was presented with the Commissioner's Commendation for Bravery, one of the highest honors that could be given to a citizen who assists police. Lily and her mother were in the audience, along with several other families whose children had been rescued. When Thomas received his award, Lily stood up and started clapping. Soon, the entire room was on their feet, applauding not just Thomas, but everyone who had played a part in bringing their children home. Many in the audience were crying, overwhelmed by emotion and gratitude. After the ceremony, Thomas spoke briefly with reporters, breaking his usual silence on the matter. He said that every adult has a responsibility to protect children, whether they wear a uniform or not. He urged people to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, if a child seems afraid or in distress, do not ignore it. Take action. Make the call. Ask the question. One moment of courage can change everything. The criminal trials proceeded over the following months. Michael Brennan was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole. Patricia Wells received 30 years for her role in organizing the trafficking network. Several other defendants received lengthy sentences as well. The judge in each case spoke about the profound harm inflicted on innocent children and the importance of sending a clear message that such crimes would be punished with the full force of the law. The international investigation continued to expand, with arrests made in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain. The network that had seemed so untouchable began to crumble as investigators followed the trail of evidence and testimony. Each arrest brought more relief to law enforcement agencies that had been fighting human trafficking for years with limited success. This case became a template for how coordinated international efforts could dismantle even sophisticated criminal organizations. For the children, life slowly returned to a new normal. Some families moved to different areas, seeking fresh starts away from the memories and media attention. Others stayed, finding strength in their community support. All of the children continued therapy, working through their experiences with professional help. Parents learned to recognize signs of trauma and how to provide the patient consistent love their children needed to truly heal. Lily showed remarkable resilience. She returned to school and made new friends, though her mother noticed she was more cautious than before and rarely strayed far from trusted adults. But she also showed incredible compassion. particularly toward other children who seemed lonely or afraid. Her terrible experience had given her an empathy and awareness beyond her years. Her mother sometimes worried about this, wishing Lily could have remained innocent a little longer. But she also recognized that her daughter had a special strength that would serve her well throughout life. Thomas continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, but his perspective had shifted. He saw each person who approached him differently now, wondering about their stories, their struggles, their needs. The tourists who posed for photos might be carrying hidden sorrows. The children who waved might be facing challenges he could not see. He remained professional and followed protocol, but his heart was more open, his awareness more acute. One afternoon, nearly a year after the rescue, Lily and her mother visited Buckingham Palace. Lily had asked to see Thomas at his post one more time. They arrived during his shift, and Lily stood proudly in front of him while her mother took photographs. To observers, it looked like a typical tourist moment. A little girl posing with a royal guard, both standing at attention in their own way. But between Thomas and Lily passed an understanding that needed no words. She had trusted him when she had every reason to trust no one. He had believed her when he could have dismissed her as a confused child. Together, they had helped save lives. That connection, forged in fear and courage, would never be broken. As Lily and her mother walked away, Thomas saw Lily look back once and give him a small wave. He allowed himself the tiniest nod in return, barely perceptible, but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. It was a moment of connection, of shared experience, of mutual respect between a child who had survived the unthinkable and the man who had helped give her back her future. The sun continued to shine on the palace grounds. Tourists continued to take their photos and children continued to laugh. But now, standing at his post in his red uniform and bearskin hat, Thomas Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that his role meant something far deeper than tradition or ceremony. He was a protector, and sometimes being a protector meant breaking the rules to do what was right. It meant seeing beyond the surface to the truth underneath. It meant believing a frightened child who needed help, and he would do it again without hesitation every single time.